Sin Fronteras, Western New York, Buffalo's media platform for Western New York Hispanics.
Producing bicultural content that informs, entertains, and inspires the forward thinking.
Sin Fronteras, Western New York, delivering bilingual stories,
hot topic conversations,
and the voices from our Latino community.
Sin Fronteras, Western New York.
La única producción contemporánea en español
y en inglés en la ciudad de Buffalo. Sin Fronteras, Western New York.
Your connection to cultural ties in Latin America
and hyperlocal news in the Western New York area.
Sin Fronteras, Western New York es para ti.
Well, Lorenzo, we're back here with Sin Fronteras.
We're back again, Kaz.
You know, but
did we relieve?
Huh?
Did we relieve?
We never left.
That's right.
We're always connected.
And today we're with important company. Do you want to tell the folks who's with us?
You know, Lorenzo, out of all the interviews, and they're all exciting, okay, but this one has a special excitement. Not only to myself personally, but I think to our audience as well. Immigration has been the topic of many agendas, and locally it's been a hot topic. And we have two of the experts with us here today. You know, from Journey's End, Pam Bos Kefi and Emily Riordan. Pamela Bos Kefi, she is the new Chief Executive Officer of Journey's End Refugee Services. They're located, I believe, at the Tri-Main building. And Emily Riordan is the Director of Immigration Legal Services. You know, two excellent resident experts to talk to us about what they're doing for the immigrants, the newly arrived immigrants, and
refugees, asylum seekers.
All of them.
We've read the headlines,
yeah,
and these two ladies have been in it, actually trying to untangle all that's going on here in Western New York. I think that's fair to say, right? Pam, Emily, thank you so very much for joining us today on Sin Fronteras.
Thanks for having us. We're excited.
And as Kaz, as you mentioned, this topic of immigration, it's our country has been founded on immigrants, and we continue to have immigrants coming, and I don't think there's certain things that are never going to get fully solved. I hope that we do. I don't want to be a complete pessimist, but we're always going to get immigrants into this country. And whether or not we let them in, that's a different story, or how we let them in is a different story. Before the interview, I mentioned how I wouldn't be here where I'm at if not for some crazy law and rule in the 1980s, wet foot, dry foot. If you listen to the recent presidential debate, immigration was something that was hammered and belabored to a certain point, I would say. And we talk about just the nuance of immigration law. Emily, I'm curious to get into that at some point, because you are the Juris Doctorate of the bunch. You know your law, and there's a lot to untangle here. I always look at the duality as a Cuban American. My parents coming in as Cubans, they got the benefit of wet foot, dry foot. Haitians don't get that, and we'll get into all that is refugees and asylum seekers and how different those paths are. But I guess before we start, Journey's End, for those that are uninformed or unaware of what you're doing, the great work that you're doing, can you explain what Journey's End is all about?
Sure. Journey's End is a human service agency here in Buffalo. We've been in existence for 40 years, and we've been serving refugees and other immigrants in a variety of ways. So legal services, resettlement services, helping people find jobs, learn English, navigate complex healthcare system, and find their way to the public school system.
You're part of the coalition, right?
We are one of 5 really sort of long-standing agencies that serve the immigrant community. And together we form something called the Refugee Partnership. And we've been formally collaborating with funding for the last few years, but we've been working together for many, many years on how to tackle all of the challenges that the immigrant community is facing here in Western New York.
That's great.
And to give more clarity for everybody, the Refugee Partnership includes yourselves, Jericho Road,
Jewish Family Services,
International
Institute, and Catholic Charities.
It's almost like the Avengers of
Yes.
of refugee rights and civil liberties.
We
So,
try. We really try.
No, you all do more than try. I tip my hat off to you all. But Pam, you have worked in human services now more than 24 years, 25 years. You've also worked 15 years of those have been with refugees and immigrants here in Buffalo. What is it that it's a calling? I outside of here, I'm in the nonprofit world. It's definitely a calling.
It's a calling.
What is it that brought you to this field and dedicate your life to this endeavor?
So I was a Peace Corps volunteer after college, and I went and lived in North Africa, in Tunisia. Tunisia, and I was alone in my community, an American alone in my community. And I had the experience of being the other person who couldn't communicate, who didn't know the culture, and I had to rely on a lot of people to help me do well in that experience. In the workplace, I could not communicate with my fellow teachers. I had a whole classroom of kids with developmental disabilities that I had to figure out how to communicate with. So I had that immersion. And when I came back to the U.S., I actually brought with me my fiance at the time, who I had met while there. So now I got to see his immigration experience here in the U.S. and what that was like to be a Muslim immigrant from North Africa here in Western New York in 1991.
A vastly different Buffalo.
Very different Buffalo than today. And so as I got started in my human services work, working with families and children and involved with the court system and school systems, mental health, substance abuse, I was now looking at all of these systems through another lens. And that was, how are people with language and cultural difference able to receive the services that your mainstream American can.
That we take for granted.
Yeah, we do take it for granted. And so I really started to advocate for change in the places where I was working. And then I eventually went to the International Institute and asked if they would hire me so that I could work directly with the immigrant community. And that's kind of how things started for me. And I started out as a refugee resettlement caseworker. And I just sort of, used that opportunity to help grow and build improved services and made my way to other places in California and back to Buffalo. And I'm just sort of always been very passionate about wherever I am, fixing the system.
And you mentioned you started with the Peace Corps.
I did,
and that's
yeah.
the folks who go into the Peace Corps, you know what you're getting into. You know that it's almost like we're seeing with you, a lifelong passion. And
yeah, I'm not sure I helped anybody when I was there, but it certainly changed my life.
And you were working with special needs with deaf students and
I didn't have deaf students there, but I did go to work with the deaf community at one point in my career. Yeah, I pivoted. I was also I came back to the International Institute at one point as the executive director, and then I went to be the executive director of Deaf Access Services, which is another linguistic and cultural minority group here that has very similar barriers to services. So it was a really interesting shift for me. And in that work, I realized we have deaf refugees here in the United States and that we really weren't providing these services. So I've developed a niche awareness about the needs of refugees with disabilities. And that's something that I currently try to organize folks around so we can fix that problem.
On top of the just normal language barrier that you might incur upon getting here, then you have that set of circumstances. And yeah, that's I can't imagine. I don't know how to myself tackle that one, but I'm glad there's folks like yourself and Emily. Your journey, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, your journey to Journey's End. How did you get to this point?
Well, I went to law school in Buffalo. That's what brought me to the area, and I started an internship with Journey's End right during my first year, and I've been there ever since. I really was surprised. I mean, I'm from Rochester, so it's a similar city to Buffalo, but I had no idea about the refugee community in Buffalo until I moved here for law school, and I did my undergraduate degree was in international studies. So I had this sort of idea in my mind that Buffalo would be a break from that kind of work. But then once I got here, I found, that we have such a large community of immigrants, and, every day is something new. For the last 10 years.
It keeps you on your toes, I got to imagine, with all the changes.
Emily, you're the Director of Immigration Legal Services for Journey's End. Do you have a staff, or is it just you?
Yes, our legal department has around 35 people. We cover Western New York. We also have an office in Rochester, Binghamton, and Ithaca. So we cover the Finger Lakes and the Southern Tier as well. And we have some attorneys based at Vive, the shelter for asylum seekers in Buffalo, as well as at the main Journey's End office. So we have a pretty wide reach across the state.
So the workload and the demand is great.
Yes.
What's some of that workload? What is that demand?
Locally in Buffalo, I think the biggest challenge we are facing right now is people who need representation in removal proceedings, so who are in immigration court, who are seeking asylum through the court system. And there are a lot of great providers in the area, some of our partners, Volunteer Lawyer Project, Journey's End. But there are so many people that need help, and the capacity for us all to keep up with that demand has been really challenging. We've tried to be innovative with our services, do more limited assistance so that we can serve as many people as possible. But we're always, just trying our best to keep up with that demand.
And these services are completely free of charge.
Yes, they're free.
Pro bono.
Pro bono.
Mm-hmm.
We got to speak in Latin. That's the language of law. And Emily, as far as, well, I guess to take a step back, to differentiate asylum seekers and refugees, can you explain the process? I'm a refugee. How am I designated a refugee as opposed to an asylum seeker? And what rights are afforded to refugees as opposed to asylum seekers, or vice versa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's interesting because in the U.S., we have this sort of unique legal definition of what it is to be a refugee. But in the global context, oftentimes the word refugee is used to describe anyone who's fleeing persecution in their home country. Whereas in the U.S., it means somebody has undergone the process of, an interview, being legally determined to be somebody who's afforded the refugee protections before they come to the United States. So that might look like spending years in a refugee camp overseas, multiple interviews to be qualified as a refugee, and then entering the United States already holding that status. Whereas an asylum seeker is going through essentially the same process, but in the U.S. So presenting themselves as they're entering the U.S. and saying, I need protection, and then going through the interview process, the screenings, all of those things to be determined to be granted asylum. From there, it looks pretty similar in terms of being able to remain in the U.S. indefinitely, being able to apply for adjustment of status, what most people call a green card, and eventually apply for citizenship, apply for their family to join them here. Yeah.
Emily, I keep hearing this backlog in the courts, not enough judges.
That's why, if I'm not mistaken, that's why last year when New York City had their overflow of immigrants to the city, bused from parts that I will keep unknown because I felt like it was done for the wrong reasons. But once they arrived in New York City, the caseload was so large, even for a place like New York City, that we here in Buffalo said we will take some of that. Has it correct me if I'm wrong, a year and some change, has that been alleviated? Are we still seeing the same amount of a logjam? I think, Kaz, that's what you're kind of alluding to. Is it still, has it gotten better?
If we're talking about the immigration court backlog in general, I wouldn't say that situation was like the cause of the backlog. That was one factor amongst decades of factors. Locally, in terms of, service providers, attorneys and things like that, yes, that was an additional demand. But honestly, over the last, decade that I've been with Journey's End, there's always a new group. There's always a new need. We had the Afghan evacuation situation in 2021. There were constant changes during the Trump administration that meant new groups of people were entering the court system or other, applying for other immigration benefits, or just kind of constantly having new legal needs. There was also, I don't want to get too into the weeds of it, but there was also COVID, which cause huge delays, like reducing staffing within the courts and USCIS, which is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the agency that people use to apply for benefits affirmatively. So that would be like citizenship, green cards, things like that. I mean, as well as just a lot of other issues in the immigration system that have kind of all combined to be in a situation where we're facing this kind of backlog.
Emily, the hearings, let's talk a little bit about the hearings. Are these hearings done locally? Are they done virtually? Are they done on site in front of a judge?
With an interpreter?
How does this process work?
So there is an immigration court in the city of Buffalo, and there's an immigration court at the holding center in Batavia. So those are the two, immigration courts that our people in this community would be interacting with. Yes, before a judge. Yes, with an interpreter. Mostly in person. I think there are some virtual hearings depending on the situation. And that's also, something that has changed post-COVID. It can be a pretty intimidating place for clients, especially if they don't have an attorney. Even with interpretation, that's not always enough to kind of bridge between a client and a courtroom like that. Like, it's just a very new experience for a lot of people, and especially for people who are fleeing persecution, who may have trauma, who may have a distrust of some of these official systems. It can be, really difficult experience.
Pam, as the leader of Journeys In, what are some of your immediate priorities?
Well, as I listen to Emily, I'm thinking we need to get more funding for legal services. That is very clear to me, or somehow come up with ways to provide a broader representation to all of the individuals in need. And I know these are things we talk about all the time. Even if we had additional funding, how do we find additional attorneys, who would be willing to do this kind of work? So there's a lot of sort of moving parts on that kind of a solution. But with the influx of folks coming in, there are increased demands on the organization. We have we've done the largest refugee resettlement that we've ever done this year. We're slotted to bring in 627 people by the end of this month. And that requires us to find housing for all of those people and register all the kids in school and get everybody refugee health assessments.
Is that 600 figure in addition to what's already arrived? Because I believe a year and months ago they were talking around 500 and something arrived.
So this is the distinction that Emily was making between refugees and asylum seekers. So these are refugees that I'm referring to who were brought here by the U.S. Federal Refugee Program. And every year Congress establishes a number of refugees that can be allowed in. And so we have numerous government agencies involved with vetting people overseas and preparing them to come to the U.S. I believe that 60,000 people were resettled in the U.S. in fiscal year 2023. And this year, the goal was to resettle 125,000 by the end of this month.
Slightly more than double.
Slightly more than double. And so
with the
in addition to the migrants that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the refugee resettlement program has been happening here in Western New York for a long time. And this is part of why we have had a rejuvenation in our community. The 4 resettlement agencies that we've mentioned earlier, who are part of the Refugee Partnership, have all been working together to bring folks in. We have different national agencies that we are accountable to. But we essentially do the same kind of work. And, on any given year, we're bringing between 1,500 and 2,000 people to Buffalo.
Goodness.
And that's been going on for years. And then we also have the migrants that come through a variety of ways, which is also not completely new. Mm-hmm. This large one-time influx is new. But we've always had folks coming through and seeking asylum. And, we had Vive. People were coming to find their way to Canada.
And these are families.
Families, yeah. Individuals, but a lot of families.
And I mean, you mentioned that it's constantly ebbing and flowing, and from different places, different points of origin. But where are you seeing, as of late, where are you seeing those folks come from? I know I spoke to a gentleman from Nicaragua. That was a surprise to me because having friends that are Nicaragüense. I didn't know just exactly, and that's my own ignorance. I didn't know exactly the turmoil going on there, but I got to imagine Venezuela. What groups are you seeing in high numbers?
So in the resettlement program, our largest number, we're still coming from Burma. We have Democratic Republic of Congo is the next, kind of highest number. We have Syrians, Afghans, Somalis, Iraqis, and then we hit Venezuela, and then Congo, which is different than the DRC, Colombia, Burundi, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Cuba, El Salvador, Honduras, Ethiopia, Ivory Coast, Togo, Sudan, South Sudan, and Pakistan. Those are the refugees that are being resettled. I don't think I have exact data for who are coming through some of the migrant communities, but if we took a look at our legal services in terms of Spanish speaking, we would see that they are from Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala.
So they're not from Mexico,
No.
you know, because you hear
That's-
a lot that,
Again,
a lot are coming from Mexico.
Certainly,
Well,
probably a portion, but southern, northern borders.
And we're not seeing people who are coming because of economic reasons. We're seeing people who are fleeing persecution and extreme danger because of political unrest and instability. It's a very different type of scenario than somebody who's just coming for work.
Yeah, and each of these individuals have a story to tell. Why they're fleeing their country, and going back to you, Emily, in order for them to get into the path of legal citizenship and what have you, there needs to be some research. Is that right? As to why they fled their country, what experiences personally they had in their country. How do you get that information from their country or where they lived in let's say, Colombia or Guatemala? How do you get that information?
Yeah, so in order to be successful in an asylum case, you do have to provide a lot of evidence. And that's something we try to explain a lot. It's, it's not just filling out a form. It's filling out a form and compiling personal evidence as well as evidence about the conditions in the country. So that might include, reports of injuries if somebody was harmed by, the police or the government. Sometimes there might be newspaper articles from the country they're fleeing, identifying them as like a political opponent or something like that. There may also be general reports. So there are general reports as well. There's a U.S. State Department report on the condition of, each country each year that we use a lot. There's also just other media sources that, together with the personal evidence corroborate this person's story. But it's a very involved process. It's not just necessarily a matter of saying this happened to me. It's this happened to me and here's all the proof.
And, you hear publicly that these folks are have bad backgrounds and what have you. That's really not so.
No, I don't have the site with me, but I believe that, there have been a number of studies showing that the, rate of crimes is much lower amongst immigrants than amongst the general population of the U.S. So.
One of the popular things now in this election cycle has been migrant crime.
Yeah.
Right.
And the painting of immigrants as
Bad people.
Right.
That's not our experience.
Right.
Our experience
I was going to say in every circumstance there's nuance and there's good and bad, but it's being portrayed as this just influx of crime. And what you're seeing are people that want to be a part of our fabric of our society, contribute
for the American dream.
Right.
Well, and the folks that are coming, whether it's through the refugee pipeline brought here by our government or the folks that find their way here and eventually get asylum, there's a very large diversity of career backgrounds and educational backgrounds. There isn't sort of one demographic for what's a refugee or an asylum seeker. We have doctors and engineers, professors. We have people who are fluent in English. And then we also have shepherds and mechanics and, people who haven't really had a lot of education, but they definitely want that for their children. And there's a very strong work ethic. So, everybody I've ever worked with is highly concerned that they have to wait to get their kids into school. And why aren't we doing it on day 2? And, very motivated to really get started as a productive member of our community.
You mentioned, the background of some of these individuals. And my experience has been that some of these folks have professional lives where they're fleeing from.
Yes.
And they come here for a better standard of living because of economics, because they're fleeing, the situation in their country. But have you seen that some of those professionals that have come have really just merged into their profession here, or have been able to given the opportunity to exercise their profession?
I mean, I've definitely seen that. It's very difficult. I think that there are some folks who have natural leadership skills, and they may have had some leadership position in their home country. And when they come here, they end up organizing their communities and starting a community center, or becoming the advocate on behalf of these families when there's issues at City Hall or in block clubs. So you see people engaging in like sort of civic engagement, but maybe they can't become the doctor they used to be because it takes so much time and back in school to become recredentialed. So they might choose not to bother. We've seen people become doctors here, lawyers here. It can be done.
Business people too.
Business people, lots of entrepreneurs.
Small businesses. Burmese people.
Right.
People from Colombia.
They're working at the Erie County Department of Social Services, or at all the companies in town. I think you talk to any manufacturing CEO, and they'll tell you that they have refugees and immigrants working in their companies who have incredible work ethic.
And just to go back to what you said at the beginning of that question, because I think this sometimes gets lost in the conversation of immigrants in general, is, it's not just I want a better standard of life. It's not just I want the American dream. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about that because that is true a lot. But sometimes somebody really doesn't want to leave their home country, has a good life, has a career, and is forced to, and then gets here and faces all this challenge and backlash. And why are you coming here to do this and do that when, it's really not even so much a choice as it is just a necessity.
Do you see some of the clients, that are here for a while, they sort of get on their feet and they go back to their country? Do you see that?
I do see that. Yeah. They might go back to visit, or they might establish a way to support family back home, and they go back to take care of older parents. I've met people who are really well established here, and then they go back on summer so their kids don't forget the language. But it all depends on what the safety and security factors are back home. Mm-hmm. Some countries resolve their conflict, and then the person, maybe they have citizenship here, but now it is safe and they can go home. There are a lot of them who can never go home because things don't resolve and they would be unsafe. We have a lot of families that are split too. One person came through and the others couldn't.
Or their children, or
Yes.
The gentleman from Nicaragua left his two daughters.
Yeah, through both avenues, through the refugee pipeline and through the asylum networks. We have people who've come without their family members, husbands and wives separated for years, children and parents being separated.
Usually because that's what they believe or they're advised would be the fastest option for everyone. Get one person there and then get the rest. But it's once you are here, you're facing this, huge system, and it's not that quick, and then the separation ends up going on for a really long time, which is really difficult.
Or they couldn't afford the travel for all of them. They had to pick the one, or it's often it's the father, the person who was involved with politics, the person who was outspoken in the community, who is now unsafe and leaves, so the family is not in danger.
We're just seeing that in Venezuela, a presidential candidate had to flee the country because of alleged persecution and an arrest warrant out for him. It's there's so many different stories and so many origins for why people end up here. And I want to really I hope that our audience, I think our audience that's listening understands this. It's a general populace that I wish would understand the plight of individuals. Emily, you mentioned it. Some folks don't want to leave their country. My parents didn't want to leave their country. They wanted to come back, and they've never gone. It's not as simple as, they're in this country, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources. Why are they here? It's not that cut and dry.
They've had to leave all their possessions behind. But when I first started doing this work, I was working with the Kurdish refugees. It was 1997, I think, and they were the ones who had been helping our troops in northern Iraq and Kurdistan. And so we were pulling out, and we gave them like 24 hours to get to a specific checkpoint, and if they could make it there, these employees of ours, then they would be air vac'd out to Guam. And so it was these rapid decision making had to happen. And what do we take with us? And there was one family where the mom had to bring her fur coat. Like that was the thing she had to bring.
At Buffalo.
And they arrived here in the winter, and she had this fur coat and flip-flops because they'd been coming from Guam. But I will never forget her and the struggle she was having around, yes, I know I'm safe, but we were the successful people in our community. We were the leaders. We were partnering with the U.S. government. And now we're, starting over in the city of Buffalo with food stamps. And, we can't operate at that level in our community now.
Yeah.
To hopefully break some of these stigmas that we hear out there. As Western New Yorkers, we couldn't escape the criticisms and the concerns and all the conversations around the resettled refugees out by the airport and in the hotels. I think we're at a far better place than we were about a year ago. I know there was a lot of discussion about the funding of that. For the uninformed, it was DOCO. And that, I understand now that DOCO has been kind of
phasing out.
Mm-hmm. And as of recently, not too long ago, there's a brand new migrant program now that's being one of those main cogs in that program. Can you explain how the untangling of that? Because I don't want to say that it was hunky dory. It had its issues, but it's isolated issues. Can you kind of give us a little bit more of what exactly went on with the resettlement program and where it is now?
So I, being newer to Journey's End, wasn't a part of the network during all of that, but I have spent some time with the other CEOs of the refugee partnership agencies, and I know our staff were involved throughout this process. But basically, our role was immigration legal services for all of the folks in the hotels. We were not involved with providing social supports and other services. Jericho Road and Jewish Family Service were the primary providers, and Jewish Family Service will continue to be the agency responsible for relocating them from hotels into apartments and helping them integrate into the community. There are other families in New York City that are interested in coming to Buffalo. There are organizations, state-level organizations that are encouraging more families to come here. So that could happen. We actually have a significant challenge in Western New York with housing.
What is the reason for why they want to come to Buffalo? Is it because the services are better here?
Well, there aren't that many communities in New York State that are willing to have the migrant communities come. And they also don't have the infrastructure that we have. We have a wonderful and unique situation here in that we have the 4 resettlement agencies and one very significant sort of wraparound service in Jericho Road. And because of all the work we've been doing over the years, we have systems in place. Our medical providers are familiar with working with people from other countries. Our social services is familiar. The DMV has procedures, so it's not starting from scratch here. So it makes sense, but we do have to be really careful about how we do something like that. We have to make sure we have the infrastructure and that we can handle the pace at which people are coming. So there's a lot of thought being given to this situation. Legally,
the biggest hurdle, I believe, other than getting your green card, your residency, getting asylum status, it's work permits. And I guess my question is, what do we need to do still, I guess, on the federal level, because it comes down to DC, the Congress, actually making moves, and that's been kind of in a bit of stalemate as of late. What do we need to do? What do we need to see to kind of alleviate that process? Because a lot of these people that are here now, they just want to work. They want to start their lives, but they can't, and they're forced to do odd jobs. They're forced to do other type of labor work, and that's that one piece that
or they rely on food pantries, right, and things like that, handouts. Yeah.
So what do we need to see on the federal level to hopefully alleviate that?
That's a big question.
I know. We're not going to fix
solving
all the problems, but we're gonna
system. Yeah. I mean, I think putting resources into the existing programs that we have, the existing, structures that we have, making decisions on asylum applications would be a really great start. The courts are backlogged, but USCIS, which is, as I mentioned, the agency that handles the affirmative applications, is even more so. We have clients waiting 7-8 years for a decision in their case, sometimes even after they've already gone through an interview, and it's really just a matter of yes or no. And that holds up. I mean, while they're able to work during that time, that holds up, bringing family over. It holds up, and like wife and children, family, we're not even talking extended family.
Right.
Yeah. Just really establishing, a life, because you're just sitting in limbo, kind of waiting for these things to happen. I also think there could be more temporary work visas for people who maybe do want to come earn money and go home. I think that that might alleviate some of the asylum applications if that wasn't kind of the only choice. That being said, people who have a fear of return have a right under the law to apply for asylum, and I don't think we should discourage that. But I do think there could be other, options that might make it less backlogged. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to take a lot of different things coming together. And I think, we haven't had a significant immigration reform since the 90s. So
we almost got there
being,
this year.
Yeah.
We almost did, but
not being I don't know how we move it from this issue that no one in Congress is really willing to tackle for whatever political reasons to something that we're actually, there's a lot of things that there is a lot of agreement on. DACA is a whole nother issue that we don't even really talk about anymore, but a path to citizenship for, undocumented people who entered
students
without status as children who are now adults, even, just trying to resolve some of those issues would, again, also contribute to lessening the backlog, which would therefore speed up other processes. It's
a trickle effect. And Emily, I appreciate you answering the question. You did a stellar job. I know I gave you this massive what if, and I guess to now make it a little easier on the local level, what can we do here in Western New York, in Buffalo, within our system in place to alleviate the plight of these individuals and hopefully give them an easier path to becoming members, contributing members, official legal members of our society.
Mm-hmm. We need resources for them. We have a hard time finding healthcare appointments, primary care, new patient appointments. We have a hard time finding clinics that will do refugee health assessments. We need good housing and safe housing. So, on very specifically, if somebody has a couple of units in an apartment and they think that they might like to work with one of the resettlement agencies to offer housing, we would love to hear from them. Any one of us, International Institute, Journey's End, Jewish Family Service, Catholic Charities, we all have to find housing for folks. And there is rent money and security deposit money. And so we're not looking for free housing, but just to have a sort of a pipeline of resources more readily available. We end up putting people in hotels when they arrive by plane. When the services used to be, we would pick you up at the airport and put you into a furnished apartment already, but we're having a hard time sourcing apartments. So that's actually a really big need. Jobs, employers that are willing to hire. We have to fix our transportation system. I'm sure you've heard that the jobs are not where the people live. And when you first arrive, you don't have a car. I was at a meeting this week with employers and government officials talking about all the barriers to employment and how do we help the employers here find workers, and can there be more strategic collaboration between us who are part of this flow of people and employers. And one of the things we came up with was people need cars. And they need to be able to get a driver's license. And right now in our county, we have some real barriers to getting a driver's license. New York State Department of Motor Vehicles will provide interpretation if necessary, but the county won't. And we have two kinds of DMVs here, county and state. So, there's these small
it's
systemic
these things
barriers.
You don't think about as a citizen that we all take we take for granted.
Well, we should want people to be healthy because they're in our community, and we should want people to be working because they're in our community and they're contributing. So if there's ways to help people get their license faster and help them get a car so they can go to work, then the entire family is better off,
Right.
and so is the community.
You're right. And this all is about relationships. And partnerships.
Yes.
With community-based organizations, with government, with elected officials. you talked a little bit about the housing need, and I know that Senator Sean Ryan has introduced a plan to be able to support the housing demand that has been caused a lot of what we're talking about. The immigrant community, the asylum seekers need housing. How's that partnership going? How's that information flow? How's that helping you address that housing need?
Our unique challenge is that when people first arrive, they need housing and they don't have any credit history or income. So they can't qualify for loans and they can't qualify for any of the public housing right away. We have to cover them until they're able to take care of themselves. So we don't have access to most of that social support housing that people are talking about. Now, a lot of refugees and immigrants become landlords. They do buy property and they become landlords. So I would like to see programming for them to be able to help them become part of the solution. They're no longer the recipient of the services. They can actually be somebody who's involved with helping provide the housing to people. And so how do we teach them about codes and standards and ways to get grant funding to put in new windows or to do lead abatement? So I'm thinking a lot about that lately. How do we work directly with landlords who are immigrants to have them help other people?
I think I didn't think of that angle where it's almost like, well, where I'm from, back in South Florida, it was a microcosm that was eventually formed with the Cuban American population, and I see that a little bit with like the Bengali community. There's a strong microcosm enclave rather there that has helped their own and knows the plights of those coming in now currently, and they've been here for a while and just helping and offering that lending hand. I think that's important. But for those groups that don't have that, I could see where that's that much tougher. But
well, and since we're responsible for finding the housing, we have to have relationships with those communities because they're actually working with us. It's such an interesting dynamic too, bringing all the different cultures together and landlords who speak one language and residents who speak another, and how do we help navigate garbage takeout day and all the things that happen in a community around housing. It's a really interesting dynamic.
You worked in Tunisia, you worked in Haiti as well.
I did.
Do you think that working across multiple organizations, cultures, how has that cross-cultural experience shaped your leadership style now becoming the head of Journey's End?
Well, I think I've had so many diverse experiences from working at various levels within this system to working and living within different language and cultural groups that I can kind of understand all the parts of it. So I see myself as almost more of a broker, like a broker of relationships and
You're
being able to bring
tissue
the people.
Almost.
Yeah, because I understand this side and this way and that way. And so I've lived in really, Haiti is an incredible place to live. I'm so appreciative of my experience there. It's a very, very poor country and very unstable. So I've also had the experience, that maybe some of our clients have had and can see how that can affect somebody. So I guess I have a deep compassion for the experiences that folks have come through. I have a little bit of lived experience where I understand how scary it is to be interacting with law enforcement and not know how to communicate. And feeling of being unsafe in a community and not know how to get safe. But yeah, so I guess I do bring all that together to be a gatherer of the parts. And my work in various places, like even in California, where I worked with crime victims, with law enforcement, and you get to see how things are done in so many different ways that I think I can sort of imagine the ways we could do it better.
Are you seeing other communities, other cities? Are there any other locales in this country that are tackling a wave of immigration the same or if not better than us? Or what lessons are we learning from others throughout the country? Because there are other hotbeds of immigration. What are you seeing nationally?
I think that there are various programs throughout the country that we look to as model. I think Buffalo is sort of looked at as the model.
I wanted you to get to that
We have
because
a little
I
bit
feel
of
like
privilege
that.
in that way.
I feel like we've earned a badge after last year and the work that you all are doing now. I feel like that's that. I mean, I've researching for this interview. You've the new program, that the new model that's being implemented. Buffalo has really stepped up to the plate and really done very well. We mentioned all the things that happened with DACA, but it's taking those lessons and moving forward. And
well, I mean, we have Vive. Vive has been a gem here for years. I've been involved. When we first moved back here from Tunisia, my spouse worked there for a while. It was a welcoming place for its immigrant employees. That's very unique. And during that time when Vive first was coming to fruition, there was a lot of migrants living in our homeless shelters. And so the community came together. Mostly it was nuns who did this, but they found a home that was specifically for this population. And we've got these resettlement agencies. We've collaborated with our county and our city and medical providers. The school district is amazing. There will always be things we need to improve. But if I look back since the time I started, we have so much, we have layers of rich services that have been developed. We have Providence Farm Collective, which is an amazing thing that, I probably need to learn more about, but that was developed to support the needs of refugees who were coming with farming backgrounds and to give them a place and a way to continue to express their occupation or vocation. We have mental health services. We have survivors of torture services. We have had human trafficking and battered immigrant women services here. And so as a community, we've been really proactive in developing the things that people need.
Pam, as the leader of this agency, what do you see Journeys End evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we're in the process of thinking about that as an organization. As a new leader, I wouldn't come into an organization and just sort of make those decisions myself. The board, the staff, and I, and the people we provide services to have to come together to make some of those decisions. So we're starting a strategic planning process, which will help inform some of that. But I do know that we have an election coming up that could really influence our ability to continue our services in the same way. And I think one of the things that we're talking a lot about is if we were to no longer be able to do refugee resettlement, which is a possibility under certain circumstances, what is our role in addressing the more like lifespan services for the immigrant community? What other things do the immigrant community need that we could start to offer? So we're looking at diversifying funding and programming that wouldn't look very different, but it might just be that we're available to people later in the later years. Maybe we'd be the ones to help solve the housing problem. We have more time to focus on those kinds of things.
If folks wanted to contact Journeys End, how would they be able to do that?
So I think we have a great website. It's www.jursbuffalo.org. And on our website, you can find the intake number for the legal department. I will say, let's see if I get this right. You can call that number. You'll probably have to leave a message. You can leave that message in any language, and we will figure out what it says. We have a very long wait list for legal services. It could be several months, and sometimes we even have to put a hold on even taking those appointments. But we do encourage people to try.
What is that phone number?
It's 716-882-4963. And from there will be prompts.
And the website is jursbuffalo.org. JERS Buffalo.org.
And one other thing I just wanted to add, the legal department does do community information sessions. So if there's any organizations or just a group of people that have a specific issue they want an attorney to present on, that's something that we offer through our partnership with the Office of New Americans. So we are always available for that, especially as new policies come out. There's always changing programs. So we want to make sure people are informed and not following the rumor mill, because that is something that happens a lot. Or TikTok.
No, not at all. What? Where are people getting these?
I just want to add as well, for people to contact us to receive services, those are the pathways. But if you want to get involved
Okay.
in
my
a
next
giving fashion,
Perfect.
we have mentors. We hook young adults and older youth with mentors. And so if you're interested in that kind of an experience, we would love to hear from you. We also have the an immigrant resource program, which is funded by the Office for New Americans, where we bring information to immigrant communities. And so if you have resources you'd like to bring to immigrant communities, we can help you do that. And we really, this is one of my favorite things that we do, which is called Home Again, where groups come in and help set up apartments. And when
wonderful.
a group comes together to set up an apartment, it is truly home. When our staff have to do it, it just lacks that certain something. We don't have the time or resources to get the pretty curtains or the wall hangings or the pillows or the stuffed animals. But when these teams come in, like a M&T Bank will come in with a whole, group of staff, and they'll have sourced all the stuff, and then they come in and they clean and they set it up, and it's just really amazing. And then they feel really good about being able to help a particular family.
Do you have many walk-ins?
We do have a lot of walk-ins.
Do you?
Yeah.
They just show up?
They do. Well, the word is out, right? And people hear things like this and they come. And so we do the best we can to find them the right department. If it's an English, if someone's looking for ESL, we'll hook them up with that pathway. If it's legal, we probably, what do we do?
We schedule them for a consult as one is available. And I think also just in general, whomever is the first point of contact at the agency will screen for any other services that they might qualify for at the agency. If you come to legal, that doesn't mean you might, we can connect you with ESL, we can connect you with employment, those sorts of things.
Yeah. I hear that you have a very strong translation component.
We do, yeah.
Tell us
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
We have an interpreting and translation department, and we have people from all over the world who are working per diem as interpreters and translators.
Not just here in Buffalo. This is a global effort almost.
Yeah, so we can use translators who are anywhere. We do all our work by email. We're working on setting up more of a video remote interpreting service, so that would be interpreters could be sitting in their home in another state and providing interpreting through us. And so I see this not only as a language access service, but it's also workforce development, because these are jobs for people.
Yep.
And, especially those people who do have those higher education or professions, they tend to be more bilingual when they arrive. And so giving them an opportunity to get involved in that kind of a career path is really a beautiful thing. Yeah. And so we have to do a lot of advocacy and a lot of outreach to all of the healthcare providers and courts and schools, all the places that need to use interpreters to, just to keep those relationships going so they will use our services.
Many wraparound services. So, Journeys In has many departments.
We have many departments. We do refugee resettlement. Within that, we have employment services. We have intensive case management services. We have an education department where we teach English and citizenship classes, legal services, the immigrant resource program. We have the refugee mentoring program. We have a refugee school-based program where we have academic coaches in the schools teaching kids in their own language in those tough subject matters. There's other things, I'm sure.
The farm.
We have the farm. We have an urban farm near the Tri-Main building where we have folks who can go grow fruits and vegetables, and we sell that. We have a food pantry.
I mentioned it earlier. Buffalo is become a model in as far as helping out these newly resettled individuals, and you're I'm so glad we had you on the show, because it's you don't know what you don't know, and the fact that folks are hearing some of these resources and also the needs that are out there. As we kind of wrap up this conversation, I want to just pose another big question. So Emily's already bracing herself. No, but I guess with all the rancor, with all the criticism, the talk, or all this rhetoric that we hear, what is it that you would like to impart if you had that an open mind and an open ear? What is it that you'd like to impart on the naysayers? I'm making a straw man here, but it's out there. What would you like to put out there for those folks to know about seeing firsthand the stories, the individuals that you deal with on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I always, when I'm sitting in an appointment with a client who's telling their really difficult personal story, I find myself thinking, if any one of those people was sitting in this room, there's no way they would feel the way they do. You know, I think just remembering we're all human, and the way that the discourse can be around these issues makes it seem like we're not, but we are. And, you know, the people that are coming to this area are no different from anyone else who was born here, and just keeping an open mind, and, you know, remembering the humanity behind it, and just kind of putting those other things aside, because they really aren't actually what's really happening most of the time anyways.
In addition to the compassion that we hope people will have, I think people need to remember the economic impact that the immigrant community has in our community.
That's right.
We have a declining population here in Western New York. Nationally, there's a declining birth rate, and we've been really fortunate to see improvements in our community because of the repopulation from the refugee resettlement program. And so, well, this is how Buffalo was started. You know, every group of immigrants has brought something new to the area that has really influenced our culture. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I'd like people to have some gratitude.
Mm-hmm. America's the land of immigrants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not taking. The federal dollars that come to this community as well through resettlement is pretty substantial. So, like Medicaid, for example, is, you know, not coming out of county coffers. That's money that comes with the refugee resettlement program to help them while they're here. So the schools, you know, we're repopulating the schools. We're bringing students into the Buffalo Public Schools, which essentially, you know, in a very basic way, helps us get more funding for our school district from the state. So.
And you're just enhancing the rich tapestry.
That's right. The diversity is so rich.
I chose where to live when I was raising my family based on where there were the most diverse people. That was a really important thing to me.
It does a lot for the future, you know, where children can relate with one another, different backgrounds, different languages, different experiences. It's what makes our communities rich.
Right. It helps kids be able to navigate globally and imagine ways that they can live expansively. Yeah.
Do you find that some of these immigrants or asylum seekers speak more than one language?
Oh, so many.
Huh?
Yes.
You see that?
More than 3, more than 4, a lot of the time.
I think there's some controversy about the acronym ESL, because it's English as a second language, when actually it's not their second language.
Sometimes third, fourth.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Emily Riordan, Director of Immigration Legal Services. Pam, the boss, Kefi, CEO of Journey's End Refugee Services Incorporated. Ladies, thank you so very much for your time today, for sharing your knowledge with our audience. Thank you for the work you're doing with this very important population that sometimes is getting the short end of the sticks. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time today on Sin Fronteras.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to the community.
Muchas gracias.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.